All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today we're looking at Herod the Great. We've got a lot of historical analysis to work with, but what I really wanted to use is Zora Neale Hurston's book. She really brings Herod's world to life. It's amazing. You guys know we love to challenge assumptions around here,
Right?
so get ready for some surprises. Hurston's take on Herod is anything but typical.
Yeah, it's really interesting how Hurston moves past that evil king image. You see that a lot, especially in anything written from a Christian perspective. It's like she's saying, wait a minute, there's a lot more to this story.
Exactly. Anyone interested in history, power, or just what it means to be human is going to love this. It's not just a list of facts and dates.
Right. It's like you're stepping right into this world, all the political scheming, cultural clashes, and you know what? There's even some pretty good drama.
Oh, for sure.
Right from the beginning, Hurston goes against that typical bad guy image of Herod. She points out how popular he was with the people. Even Josephus, the historian, he had his own issues with Herod, but even he recognized Herod was a pretty good ruler. He brought stability, he brought prosperity, and people, even if they didn't like how he did it, they appreciated that.
It's amazing how she brings all these different viewpoints together. You start to see all the complications of his reign. He wasn't just some king sitting on a throne. He was a real person working within a really difficult system.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember Herod wasn't just some barbarian. He was educated at the University of Damascus. He knew Greek philosophy.
Wow.
This guy was smart. And he had to work within a really complicated world. Judea back then was this mix of cultures and religions all competing with each other. You had the Pharisees, super strict about Jewish law, then the Essenes, who were into Greek and even Indian philosophy, and the Sadducees, they were the rich and powerful ones.
It's like trying to imagine today's politics, but with togas and chariots. You can just feel the tension, everyone trying to get ahead.
Oh, totally. And then on top of all that, Herod was appointed by Rome. So he's trying to keep the Romans happy while dealing with all these Jewish groups. And of course, he's trying to keep his own power too. You can see how he had to make some tough choices, choices that weren't always, completely ethical.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. And it's in those morally gray areas where Hurston's writing is just, it's fantastic. She doesn't shy away from the darker side of Herod's personality. But you also understand why he was the way he was. Like all that political scheming and family drama, it was crazy. Back then, political assassinations were common. People were always trying to get ahead, no matter what. Hurston captures that whole Machiavellian world perfectly.
I know, right? There's this one scene that I love where Alexandra, she's from the Asamonean dynasty. She's watching Herod, just sizing him up, figuring out how she can use him for power. You realize no one could be trusted, not even family.
It's like you're not just reading a biography, it's a story. You're right there in the middle of it. That's what makes Hurston's book so good. You feel like you're standing right next to Herod, watching it all happen.
Absolutely. And you know what else? Hurston and some modern scholars like Adam Marshak, they make a good point about Herod. He knew how to play the game. He understood how important image was, how people saw him, and he was brilliant at adapting to different cultures. To the Romans, he was Roman. To the Greeks, he was Greek. And to the Jews, he was Jewish. He even became a member of the Stonemasons Guild just to get information.
Wait, what? He became a stonemason.
Yeah.
That's incredible. See, this is what I mean about Hurston's book. Every chapter, there's something new and amazing. You just have to keep reading to see what happens next.
I know, right? And there are a lot more surprises, believe me, especially when we get to Herod and Cleopatra.
Oh, Cleopatra. Now you've got me hooked. So we've got power struggles, political intrigue, and maybe even a little romance.
Well, let's just say you don't want to miss their meeting. It tells you a lot about Herod's ambitions and how hard it was to stay loyal in a world where everyone's switching sides all the time.
I'm on the edge of my seat. I think our listeners are going to be fascinated by this side of Herod,
Oh.
especially those who think they already know his story.
I think so, too. This side of him often gets ignored, and it's one of the things that makes Hurston's book so interesting and new.
Well, I can't wait to hear more. For our listeners, I think this deep dive is going to leave you wanting more.
Oh, definitely. This is just the beginning. We've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole world of drama, culture clashes, and personal ambition waiting to be explored. Welcome back, everyone. So as we go deeper into Herod's story, I'm really struck by how he's connected to all these famous people and events. It's like he's right there with Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, even Cleopatra, all the big names from Roman history.
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing to read about them in a textbook,
Yeah.
but it's so different to see them through Herod's eyes. You realize he wasn't just watching history happen, he was part of it.
Totally. And that's where you see how smart he was politically. There's this one story that I really like. It's when Herod went to talk to Sextus Caesar, the governor of Syria, on behalf of his dad. It took a lot of courage to stand up to a powerful guy like that, especially when Herod was still young and trying to make a name for himself.
It really makes you think, what was he thinking back then? Was he just being a good son, loyal to his family? Or was it more strategic, like a way to show everyone how brave he was, how loyal he was to Rome?
That's what's so great about Hurston's book. It makes you question things, look at things from different angles. It's not just about what happened, but why it happened. So on the surface, yeah, it's about family. But it also shows you how well Herod understood Roman politics. Even back then, he knew how to play the game.
And he wasn't afraid to use whatever he could, right? Like that whole thing with the horse, the gift he gave to Sextus Caesar.
Oh.
Classic.
It shows you how practical Herod could be. He understood that sometimes you gotta, compromise a little to get what you want.
Right. But then, just when you think you're starting to get Herod, things get dark. There's that plot to kill his father. Malichus is behind it, and get this, Hyrcanus is involved. It's brutal. A real reminder of how dangerous that world was.
Yeah, it is. It's where the personal and the political, they just crash into each other. It's intense. You see how betrayal affects Herod, how it drives him, but it also makes him harder, less trusting.
And it's all happening while there's this threat of war with the Parthians. Talk about pressure. He's dealing with enemies at home, and now this huge threat from outside could have ruined everything he was working for.
Those Parthians were a wild card. When they invaded Judea, everything went crazy. The siege of Jerusalem, Herod's escape, his desperate trip to Rome. It's all so suspenseful. You really feel what was at stake, not just for Herod, but for everyone.
It's like one of those big historical movies, you don't know who's going to survive. But even when things are really bad, you see how strong Herod is, how quick he thinks. He's always adapting, planning, doing whatever it takes to come out on top.
Exactly. And that takes him to Rome, which is another huge turning point. He goes from running for his life to being crowned king of Judea by the Roman Senate. That's amazing. It shows you how persuasive he was, how he could convince people he was the right guy for the job.
It's like he's playing chess, and everyone else is playing checkers. He gets Mark Antony and Octavian on his side. That takes serious skill, not just luck. Especially since Octavian later became Emperor Augustus.
Oh, absolutely. He had to convince these really powerful guys that he was capable, but also loyal to Rome. It was a huge risk, but it paid off. He goes back to Judea with the most powerful empire in the world behind him.
Wow. But even as king, his troubles aren't over. There's still political scheming, and his own family becomes a source of both love and conflict, especially with Mariamne.
Ah, Marianne, that adds a whole other level of, well, everything. The relationship is passionate, intense, but it's also full of suspicion and jealousy.
That's one of the parts of the book that I couldn't put down. You see how much Herod loves her? But at the same time, he's so paranoid and jealous. It's like he can't escape his own ambition, even for her.
Yeah, I get that. And it all leads to this really tragic series of events. Even though I knew what was going to happen, it still really got to me. I don't want to spoil it for our listeners. But let's just say that power and love, they don't always mix well, especially not in Herod's world.
It's the kind of story that stays with you.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, could things have gone differently? Could Herod have found a way to be both powerful and to truly love Mariamne?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's not one that Hurston tries to answer for you. She tells the story with all its complications and contradictions and lets you figure it out for yourself.
Which is what makes a great biography. It's not about judging, it's about understanding.
Right. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about history. It's about looking into the human heart, asking big questions about ambition, love, and the price of power.
And we're not done yet. There's still so much to talk about in the next part of our deep dive, those massive building projects, the temple, and Hurston's really interesting take on Herod's role in the rise of Christianity. It's going to get even better, so stay tuned. We're back and ready for the final part of our deep dive into Herod the Great's life. And let me tell you, things don't exactly calm down as he gets older.
No, not at all. What really stands out to me is how Herod's ambition just explodes at this point. He's not content with just ruling Judea anymore. He wants to create something that will last for centuries, a legacy that will outlive him.
Right, and that's where all those incredible building projects come in, the huge fortifications, entire cities like Sebastin, and of course rebuilding the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It's mind-blowing, the sheer scale of it all.
You can imagine, right? Rebuilding the temple took thousands of skilled workers. They used the best materials, brought in from all over the Roman Empire. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement, a symbol of Herod's power, his piety, his connection to Judaism.
I've always loved ancient architecture, and this just fascinates me. You can picture all those workshops, the noise of hammers and chisels, the thousands of people working together to build something so huge.
It's impressive, for sure. But even while Herod is achieving all of this, there's this constant tension in the background. His personal life, especially with Mariam, it's falling apart. He's surrounded by enemies, people plotting against him. And that suspicion, that paranoia, it never really leaves him.
It's like a classic tragedy, isn't it? The hero's greatest strength is also his downfall.
Yeah.
Herod's ambition, his drive to achieve, it ends up costing him everything.
It does make his story feel very human, very real, even after all this time. We all have those internal struggles, those conflicting desires that can lead us down the wrong path.
And with Herod, that path leads to some pretty dark places. The story of his sons, their ambitions and rivalries, it adds another layer of complexity. It's a family drama, but with the fate of an entire nation at stake.
And that's where I think Hurston's perspective is so valuable. She doesn't shy away from the tough parts of the story, but she also presents Herod in a way that makes us rethink what we thought we knew.
You're talking about her argument that Herod, even with his reputation for cruelty, was actually pretty tolerant, especially toward groups like the Essenes.
Exactly. It might seem strange, but it makes you think. The Essenes, with their focus on community, simple living, and helping others, their beliefs had a lot in common with early Christianity.
It's interesting to consider how Herod's actions, even if he didn't intend it, might have helped Christianity spread. Like, history isn't always straightforward. Sometimes the biggest events are shaped by forces you wouldn't expect.
And that's what makes Hurston's book so thought-provoking. It doesn't give you simple answers. It presents all the evidence, all the complications, and lets you decide for yourself.
So what's the verdict then? After all this, is Herod a tyrant, a visionary, a tragic hero?
I think he's a bit of all of those, and more. He was full of contradictions, capable of great cruelty, but also great kindness. A brilliant builder and a ruthless politician. He was a product of his time, but he also changed that time in huge ways.
And in the end, isn't that what makes history so fascinating? It's not about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding the people who lived through those events, their motivations, their struggles, their victories, and their defeats.
You got it. And Zora Neale Hurston's biography gives us this amazing look into Herod the Great's world. It makes us look past the stereotypes and see the real person, the complex, messy, human story behind the legend.
If you're looking for a book that will make you think, make you question everything, and see history in a new way, I highly recommend Hurston's Herod the Great. You won't regret it.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Herod the Great. We hope you enjoyed it and that it made you curious to learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time as we explore another fascinating chapter of history.